Good morning, and thank you so much for this lovely introduction. I want to start by thanking the Baha'i Chair and Hada personally for inviting me, including me in this wonderful conference. I'm honored and delighted to be here. And indeed, from the macro presentation we heard before, I'm moving into kind of a micro personal story as a researcher of children and media for many, many years. And for 30 years, pretty much, I've been engaged in studying children and media in different contexts, both in Israel. I'm originally from Israel, even though I'm in Illinois right now. And I've been studying in Israel, in Europe, and the United States for over 30 years in two strands of work, the feminist work and the children and media work. Until a certain point in my life, I kind of discovered that children have a gender as well. and therefore, I can combine those two strands into one more holistic, comprehensive way of looking at children and childhood and look at the gendered nature of children and childhood in generally, and the role media has in construction those identities. I want to start by saying, and those are some of the publications that I've been involved in over the years, some of the book publications. I want to start by saying that when you look at the area of media and children coming out of communication studies, which is my home discipline, you see two kind of dominant paradigms. There is a paradigm that comes mainly out of developmental psychology and with the social science kind of heavy emphasis on empirical studies, empiricist studies, etc. And that paradigm looks at children with the model of the child as becoming. What we mean by this is the child is in a deficit situation. I mean, the child is still not developmentally, physically, cognitively, doesn't have experience, is not a sexual being. I mean, and the child is on the way of becoming the adult. The ideal form of the human being is the adult, and the child is in the process of becoming that adult. So as a result of that, a lot of studies on children and media from that perspective test children. They test children whether they can understand the difference between fantasy and reality like adults. They test children whether they understand, violence on television or what does advertising do and how it manipulates them. It tests children whether they can understand the credibility of sources online. Whatever it is, they're testing children to see whether their cognitive skills and abilities are similar and to what degree they're different from adults. Then there is a second paradigm, and I locate myself in the second paradigm. That's why I'm giving this introduction. The second paradigm looks at children as being rather than becoming. Yes, children are different than adults. They don't have the same cognitive skills, not the same experience, not the same emotional maturity, etc., but they're being in their own right in every single minute of their lives. And therefore, when we study the role of media in their lives, we're not thinking of how are they different than adults, but we're thinking how are they right now? What do I understand? What are they taking out of it? How is it impacting their lives? What pleasures and learning they get out of it? So the result of that kind of paradigm is that the method that we use in studying children are different. Rather than more testing experimental design, it's more trying to give the child a voice in the study. It's less hierarchical. It's more ethnographic, more qualitative, more interviews, more looking for other ways of getting into the inner world of the child. And I will present to you some of the examples of how we did this over the years. And this is what this is the little journey I wanted to share with you today. And it's kind of patched because I just wanted to give little tastes of things I've been doing, mainly to just share the kind of work that has been done in children and media from that perspective. So I want to start by saying that you can see in media research in general, and with children in particular, three areas or three foci of research. You have the research that deals with the content of the media. Is the representations of gender and race, violence in the media, advertising manipulation for children, whatever. You focus on what's there in the media that children are consuming, but what is the content? What are they exposed to? They're exposing to pro-social messages or negative messages, etc. Then there is the area of audiences, meaning you study the children as an audience. What characterizes them, how unique they are, how is the media affecting them, how are they behaving with the media. You focus on the child himself or herself. And then the third level is the policy, institutional, organizational. You try to study the media themselves. Who produced the media? Does it make a difference, of what are they bringing to the work? Would men and women create different media? in terms of content, in terms of the way they handle it. Who are the policymakers? What difference could they make in the lives of children, in the way they regulate media, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the three areas that have been researched. I want to start, so what I'm going to do right now is give you examples of my own research located in those three areas. And I'm starting with the content. So one of them that I was extremely pleased to be part of was an international study with a colleague of mine. You'll see her name a couple times. She's in Germany, Maya Gotz. And we wanted to study the representation of gender on children's television around the world. Okay, so it was a multi-nation study. We had 24 countries that were part of the study. You can see 2,400 hours of media content for children. Okay, so we were analyzing television. About 20,000, more than 20,000 programs that we analyzed. Within them, there were about 26,000 characters that we analyzed on television for children, and out of them, about 15,500 human characters. So this is the body of work that we analyzed. You can see it's immense, it's huge. It was the biggest study ever done on analyzing television content for children around the world. And we want to see what is the world that children are exposed to when they spend hours and hours in front of a screen. And we have to remind ourselves that, all the literature suggests that television and screen in general today is one of the major socializers. Children spend more time in front of a screen than they spend sitting in a classroom. So this is a major socializer, just as education system is, just as parents are. This is a major socializer in their lives. So what is it teaching them? What is it teaching them about gender? That was particular, gender and race were particular questions with that study. So what we found out a lot, and there was a whole book that came out of it, but just the highlights. So overall, across the world, in those 24 countries, male characters dominate. There are twice as many male characters than female characters. Those of us who have been doing research on gender and representation know that this figure of 2/3 to 1/3 is consistent in every single, whatever you look at, Hollywood movies, whatever, that proportion of a male-dominant world. So if you're a child or child girl and you're watching television, watching screen, whatever it is, you learn that the world is dominated by men, and and there's a lot more to it. And you may say, oh, well, that's probably in, Taliban countries, but not here in the United States. We are democracy, equal, and not in Sweden, Nordic countries who are so advanced in terms of gender. Well, the surprising fact and the kind of depressing fact is that those numbers fluctuate very little between the countries. United States is like 33% women and 67% men. The UK is a little better, it's 37% women and the rest 63% men. I think the Nordic countries are maybe a tiny bit more. None of them get over 40. I mean, so it's still dominant. And the other thing that came out of it is that the more the characters are constructed, are imaginary, the more biased it is. What I mean by this is when you have human characters, it looks better in terms of balance. When you move to animated characters, where is the place that you can actually make a difference because somebody's creating them, it becomes worse. When you move to UFOs, robots, dinosaurs, imaginary creatures, objects, it becomes even worse. So the more there is control of being able to present a more equal world, the worse the situation is. One answer that goes to the institutional study is that 90% of animators in the world are men, and it just the default is that the character will be a male figure. And so that's part of it. Okay. In terms of race, the world that children are exposed to around the world is a white world. 72% of all characters in all those 24 countries were white. You can see them, the kind of minorities, the representation that you see on the screen. Now imagine one of the countries that we had in the study, we had several African countries. Imagine you're a child in Africa growing up in a country that 95 or 97% of the population is black. But all you see on television is all the great adventures and the romance and the good life and the fun is happening to white kids. What does it tell you about yourself? What does it tell you when you don't see yourself represented? And when you do see yourself represented, it's usually on the news, and it's usually as victim, or certainly marginalized. You're a victim of war or famine, on some kind of thing. But what children view is the white world of great life. So what does it mean to your identity? There were many other additional themes that I'm just, this is as I said, there's a whole book of that, and I'm just going to throw appetizers because I want to share a lot with you today. But lots of things that that came out of this study. The world of girls and boys is pretty segregated. The toys, the colors, the programs, clothes, whatever, is very different for boys and girls. Anybody who walked into a Toys R Us, you know that there are the boys' aisles and the girls' aisles, and there you walk with your son into the girl aisle, somebody will direct you, you're in the wrong place, It's like you walked into a neighborhood that is totally a different kind of race, and you're in the wrong place, quote unquote. The one really important thing, and it ties back to in my view, I saw an insight in that in the presentation before, was that you see an absence of family and community. Children are on their own. They're fighting the evil forces of the world on television. They don't have responsible adults in their lives who mentor them, who direct them, who are there to give them a security kind of net. There's really an absence of family, an absence of community. It's a very individual world kind of thing. Everybody is out there to fend them for themselves, which is a really interesting and problematic theme, if you think of it, for children growing up and not growing up with the sense that they're part of a collective, which means they have responsibility for the collective, and the collective has responsibility for them. So in terms of citizenship, in terms of future, that's a really problematic kind of issue. And the very few families that you do see are, of course, very traditional, two-parent, white parent, heterosexual family situation. I mean, it's very, very traditional. And there are many others. But I want to move to one other thing and show, well, we did study 24 countries in the world, but the origin of the program is of course a dominance of the United States. That, as you can see, 60% of the programs that we found in our study originated in the United States, and they travel around the world. Because it's much cheaper, if you're in developing countries, it's much cheaper for you to buy 50 episodes of series of, the Ninja Turtles from 20 years ago, and have it, put it on the screen and air every week, than producing your own program. It's probably cheaper than producing even one episode of local content. So you see dominance of both programs, old-fashioned programs, from the United States traveling around the world. That creates really interesting issues and problematic issues, because first it erases all local cultures. So everybody around the world is watching American programs. Then in order for American programs, and other Western programs, not only the United States, but Canada also is a major exporter. What it means for that to be economically a good deal, you produce first of all, you produce animation, because in animation you can play with whatever race and that you want, rather than show human beings, because then you're stuck with, does the person look, Caucasian or African American or Asian or whatever. So you use animation. It travels better. Then you try to erase all local cultural signs. For example, if you look at animation for children, cars drive in the middle of the road. Not on the right, I'm serious, not on the right and not on the left. So it's kind of, so it won't strike the child. What is it? They're driving on the wrong side of the road. You don't see mailboxes. Mailboxes in the United States, in suburban United States, are a very unique form. I mean, the way the mailboxes are outside of the house. So there are no mailboxes. And you're not going to have the red mailboxes in mail thing in the UK either. Because those give you a cue that you're in a particular culture. So cultural things, even technical things like this, are being erased, and instead what you get is this kind of a global world that doesn't really exist, but a sense or an illusion or a fantasy of this global world that we are all sharing, which is kind of flat, no race, no culture, no history, no family, no nothing, kind of out there. So that's an interesting point I want to. Okay, I want to share another. So I'm jumping from that study to now a couple studies about audiences, where we actually studied children. So this study is one of my favorite. It's again with my colleague Maya Gotz and two other colleagues so she's from Germany. I was in Israel. We had with a colleague in the United States and a colleague in Korea. So it was a 4 cross-cultural study. And what we wanted to study is how children use media in their make-believe world and fantasy world. And part of it was that we were uncomfortable with results coming from lots of experimental psychology studies suggesting that media kill the imagination of children. That, children who are exposed to too much media, it's kind of inhibits their free imagination, and it has a negative effect. And we had a sense from anecdotal data, from our work with children before, that there may be something more going on here that we're not studying because we're not using the right method or not using a whole set of methods. So we looked for a way to study children's make-believe world that doesn't test them, okay? So here's what we did. Here's the method. Children had this imaginary journey. We met children in small groups in their homes. They got to invite a few friends to their bedroom, and they were just, sitting on the floor, on the bed, whatever children do when they're in their bedroom. And we asked them to close their eyes, and we had music, and we let them, imagine yourself now lying here, and now you're going up above your house, and here you are above your city, and now you're kind of imagining yourself, and now you reach your make-believe world, the place you go to before you go to sleep, or that you dream about. Now, what do you see? What's in your world where you're there, et cetera, et cetera. Then we got them back, and this was done in all 4 countries with the same method. We got them back to the room, open your eyes, and now draw a picture of where you were. And we gave them, all kinds of drawing materials, and paper, et cetera. And this is an example, just for the sake of illustration, of a girl, Tessina, 8 years old in Germany. She said she was in seashells in the night, and this is her drawing. And then she also, something is missing here. Okay, well, should have been 2 other illustrations. I wonder why it doesn't come through in the PowerPoint. Anyway, she filled a little story she wrote down. She gave a title to the story, and she wrote down a story, and the parents filled the questionnaire. There's a multi-method thing here. And this is how we studied their make-believe world, because we never mentioned the word media, we didn't say anything, but when we interviewed them after that, the interview was, so what's this, and why is this red, and what are you drawing here, what is this dolphin? I mean, just kind of tell me about this. This was a teaser for conversation. And in her story, she said, I watched this documentary on television about seashells where all endangered animals are being protected, and I created this, so I imagined this castle on an island where at night all the endangered animals go inside and they're hiding inside, protected for the night, and in the morning they get out. I mean, she had the whole story that was, so she took something, a material from a documentary that she saw, and developed a whole story about how she's protecting those animals in this castle at night. Another story, and I hope this works, but I'm now concerned about the PowerPoint, we'll see. This is a boy from Israel, and this was his drawing. And we asked him, so what is this? And he said to us, let's see if it's working. Yes, it's working. He said, well, this is me. I'm wearing Spider-Man's clothes, and I have Superman cape, and I have Pokemon belts. Where's the Pokemon? Pokemon didn't come out. Pokemon, where are you? Didn't come out. And I have lasers from Star Wars, and I have a Batman head. And he says to us in the story, I have the whole story of it, and I already graduated from Hogwarts school in Harry Potter, and I'm on my way to look for Moby Dick in the ocean. That was his story. So here is a kid who's taking elements to create himself as a superpower, but he's not just imitating one particular movie that is super. He's taking bits and pieces, combining it with Harry Potter, which is totally a different genre, and Moby Dick. We didn't know the children today even heard of Moby Dick. And he's out there for this adventure. It was the whole story of, and again, we didn't ask him about media. We asked them, talk to us, tell us about your make-believe world. So this way, kind of unobtrusively, we got them to talk about media without us intervening or cueing them to talk about media. So in some cases, the results were quite clear. I mean, you can look at the picture and the drawing, and you can guess that he drew Batman and Spider-Man. You can guess the elements, but sometimes you can never guess. And here's an example of something you could never guess. This is a drawing from an Arab Christian girl in the north border, in a small village north border, close to the north border of Lebanon in Israel, because part of our sample was Arab children. And she drew this. And in the interview, we asked, and she called it the basketball game. In the interview, we asked her, so tell us, what is this, what is this? And she explained, this is me, the one girl up there, and the 2 below are her twin sister and her best friend. And they're playing basketball. And we asked him, is there a basketball field like this in your village? He said, yes, this is where we go. We play basketball. This is really happening. This is what we do. And then what is this and what is this? And we asked her, and what is this bench? Is there a bench like this in the playground? She said, no. So why did you draw this bench? She said, oh, I love this animation program on Syrian television that we get, they get on the air illegally from Syria. It's called Arthur, and it's about this little boy who has a little monkey. And when he has difficulty, or he's sad, or he fights with his family, or his mother's angry at him, he has a little bench in the garden, and he sits there, and he just relaxes, and he feels good about his life, and this is how he gets, she didn't use the word rejuvenated, but she said, oh, I so wish I had a bench like this. So I drew the bench in this basketball field. So again, I mean, you would never know that unless you talk to her, that here is something that she took out of a content in a media world, planted it in her fantasy world, in her make-believe world, and took something that is very useful for her, very empowering for her, very important for her. So this was one of the studies that I really enjoyed doing it. We spent a lot of time analyzing the material. It was a whole, we had children from 4 countries. We compared by gender, we compared by culture. There were very different stories and make-believe worlds from the different countries. There were very different drawing styles from the different countries. It's a whole world. Another study was actually about the war in Iraq in the spring of 2003. And we had a comparative study of children from Israel, Germany, and the United States. And the reason we went for the 3 countries was, of course, children in the United States were the children of the aggressor at the time, invading Iraq. Children in Israel were expecting to be victims. I mean, we were in Israel at the time preparing with our gas masks and our shelters and sealed rooms or whatever, and children went to school. I remember my children going to school with their personal gas masks, and we were preparing because of the experience of the Gulf War 10 years earlier that, we're going to be victims. We're going to be attacked once the United States attacks Iraq. And then children in Germany were representing a culture where there was strong opposition to the war. And we were interested to see what do children learn about the war, how they learn about the war from the media, what do they understand, and how the national discourse of the 3 countries actually is internalized by them, and whether there would be differences between the cultures of how they understand the war and relate to the war. And again, we didn't test them. What do you know about the Iraq War or whatever? We just let them draw pictures and talk about it. So here is what we found out. One of the questions, what is going on? What do you think is going on in Iraq right now? So a lot of the American children, and this is an example of Jason from the United States, drew scenes of war that seemed very much like animation or video games. This guy is fighting against this guy. I mean, there's lots of fighting kind of images of war. In Israel, you had the potential victimized or attacked person. So if you look at the corner rectangular over there, that girl is sitting there by, there's an alarm coming out of the radio. You can see the alarm, yeah? And she says, oh no, an alarm. And then there are 3 missiles, and one of them says chemical missiles, a dangerous missile, and a regular missile. And all 3 missiles are about to hit the home. So that was her drawing. Another Israeli, so that was Irit, a 9-year-old girl. Another Adam, an 8-year-old boy, said, had an Israeli tank with the Star of David. So you can see it's a tank shooting missiles that are being shot at him. And here, the Israeli helicopters are bombarding Baghdad. This, in Hebrew, it says Baghdad. So the Israeli children perceive themselves as being both victims and active participants in the war. Just in terms of factual facts, Israel never got involved in the war, neither as a victim nor as part of the war. But the Israeli children were very confused about it. When we asked them questions, they told us about the war is about Jerusalem and the Palestinians. I mean, they mixed the entire conflict, Israeli-Arab-Palestinian conflict with the war in Iraq and had a whole mishmash of the whole thing together, assuming it's part of the same thing. So we also asked them what is going on. What do you think? It's the same question for the German. The German sample, they were focused on suffering, on the consequences of people being hurt in the war. So here's Sonia, people suffering in war. You see the blood coming out, and people screaming from burning home. So there was lots of focus on people actually suffering during the war. Another German thing it was, when you do those studies, it's really heartbreaking because you see the kind of things that the children are feeling and experiencing. So you see here the refugees coming. There's a burning home, and the mother and two children fleeing the home, and a child that is dead on the floor. So, again, victims. And over there, this is the drawing that really got all of us kind of shaking. American soldiers are pointing guns towards an Iraqi child. I mean, that was so this is what they perceived as going on in Iraq. And of course, as researchers, we don't intervene, but those are the kind of messages we got, that the war was, of course, wrong, United States was to blame, United States is an aggressor, there's lots of suffering happening. That was the focus in the German sample. And of course, if you look at the discourse in the three countries, that was the discourse. There were so many demonstrations in Germany, and so this is what children were kind of internalizing at the time. We also asked them, what do you want? And one of the questions. And it was interesting how many of them said they want peace. So here's in Germany, we don't want war. And the drawing from Israel, for those of us in Israel are so familiar with the scene on the White House lawn of President Clinton, Yasser Arafat, and Yitzhak Rabin shaking hands when they were signing the peace. And that's kind of that's an image, that is burned in our heads, and also burned in children's heads, even if they were not alive then, because it's always repeated in the news and on Memorial Days, etc., etc. So they took that image and planted the people of the time. So you have the three people, and the names are written in Hebrew, are Saddam Hussein and Arik Sharon and Bush. Okay, so they're shaking hands. So they created this new peace agreement between Saddam Hussein, Bush, George W. Bush, and Arik Sharon, who was at the time the Prime Minister of Israel. And the word on top says Shalom, peace. So, okay, that was a really interesting book. We also, that study looked at what producers, it was a whole book of collection of articles. We also studied what producers creating programs for children think the role is during a time of war. And it was very interesting because you find in the literature on the role of media in war in general that it has a role to inform of what's happening. It has a role to keep people safe, but letting them know, there's a danger here, you should be at home there, you should do this. I mean, so it's kind of a surveillance function. And it also has a function of letting tension out, relief of tension, entertainment, ways of keep people kind of, in a mode that they can pass the crisis in somehow well-being of sorts, if you put it this way. So the same functions were true for children as well. They saw their role as to keep children safe and busy. So rather than them going to the street, stay home, watch television. We think of, watching television is bad, but if there is war and missiles outside, you better sit home and watch television and be close to mom and dad that can take you to the shelter, the sealed room, and put the gas mask on you if needed. So that was a very practical function, just stay home and watch television. So keep children entertained, have lots of programs for them. Also to provide them information in a level that they can understand, that is healthy for them to know what's going on, not to hide the truth, and yet to do it in a way that is age appropriate. And then, of course, to help relieve tension there were all kinds of programs that got children involved, and games and exercises and dancing and singing and all kinds of things that get them involved. But the major dilemma, and I interviewed lots of media producers in Israel at the time because they were busy with creating those programs, they said their major dilemma was, on one hand, they felt that they need to provide children a safe haven. There is a place that you can, escape into, the media world, and forget the trouble of the world. At the same time, they felt they have a responsibility to inform children, that they need to know what's happening. You can't protect them by not letting them know what's happening around and not building resilience for dealing with crisis situation, again, age appropriate. And then the question was, how much is too much? How much children should know at a particular age and a particular maturity. So those were really interesting questions for them. So talking about producers, I'm moving to maybe my most ambitious study ever that also came out as a book. And for years, I've been busy criticizing media portrays of gender, and I started with that. That's a major issue of concern for me, for children. And at a certain point, somebody asked me in one of I was meeting producers of a particular station. I was doing lots of conscious raising lectures all over the country, etc. And somebody said to me, "You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, it's terrible. So what should we do? And I said, oh my goodness, what should we do? What is the ideal portrayal of a girl on television? You know, a rough, aggressive girl who never cries and wears, you know, and doesn't care about how she looks. And what is the ideal boy? Like, you know, somebody who talks about his feeling and cry all the time. What are the ideal, you know, what is ideal gender portrayals for boys and girls? What should they see? And I didn't have a good answer, so I started looking, and I realized that our literature is full of critique of media, but very little prescriptive, or advice of how to improve it or how to do something different. So I said to myself, who might give me an answer? How shall I find out? And I said, well, let me talk to a few producers. I'm on this international board of the Prisoners, which is a festival that takes place every 2 years in Munich, Germany, with producers from around the world. And so I get to meet lots of people from around the world. How about if I ask a few of them next time that I go to the festival, you know, what do they do? Because they're producing quality media for children. They must be thinking about it when they pick, you know, actors and design script and narratives for the, you know, for the programs. So I thought, oh, you know, I'll talk to a few, so I have a few good answers to give some advice. I started talking to a few and I just couldn't stop. And I kept at it for 5 years. Interviewing people. I ended up interviewing, and I swear to you this, I'm not making this up, 135 producers from 65 countries around the world about what do they perceive are the appropriate gender issues for their cultures, and what should children see on the screen that will raise them, socialize them into a better gender equality world. And it was, yeah, and there was many places, and everywhere I went in the world for conferences, etc., I would look for producers to interview. It was quite intense, but fascinating on so many levels. And what came out of it, so I interviewed them, and of course what came out of it is that gender and culture and race are, and intersectionality is so entangled that you can't separate them. You can't just talk about gender without talking about race equality and ethnicity equality and class, because they're all so related. So inequality is inequality, and it comes on so many levels. And so that was one of the things that came. So the book goes into analyzing what I heard from producers in great length about culture and race, etc. But at the end of the book, I felt I needed to give back to those producers that gave me so much of their time and ideas. Those are their ideas. I just had the role of theorizing it and conceptualizing it and organizing it, but it's their knowledge, their everyday knowledge of the work. And I said, I have to do something to give back. And so my last part of the book is I tried to create a model based on what they told me of what are the good principles for a screen that would be socializing children to a better world, better, you know, social equality world. And the 8 principles, I don't know how we're doing with time. Okay. So the principles, and I'll go through them quickly because I want to get to something else, were the following. So the first one, there are 8 principles in the model. Equality, of course. Oh, it's not showing on the, okay. Equality, that boys and girls should be presented as having equal rights, opportunities, responsibilities. It was, etc. You can see that all the images that you see in the next 8 slides are taken from programs that actually were part of that the producers presented to me as examples. So they're not accidentally, they're there because there is a meaning behind it, but when I do a lecture just on this, I usually show clips to show what I mean, but we don't have the time for that. The second one is diversity. The thing is that you need diversity not only between categories. It's not only that you have to have one Chinese child, one Afro-American child, one Latino child, one Native American. You have to show diversity within each category. Because if you just show one girl, then she stands for all girls. And whatever you're going to make her, a tomboy or a beauty queen or whatever, she then becomes this new stereotype. So you have to show different girls. There are different ways of being a girl. There are different ways of being an Afro-American. There are different ways of being Latino or Latina. There are different ways. So you have to show diversity not only between categories, but within each categories. And that was a very important argument. Complexity. Once you show characters that are a complex human being, then you're by definition not falling into stereotypes. They're not either bad or good, either beautiful or ugly. I mean, that there is a complexity to our human nature, and you show characters that are complex and in many ways, and this is a major way to fight stereotypes. And again, I mean, we can go into deep depth. Similarity was an interesting thing. A lot of the media presents gender differences and segregation as if they're so different from each other that there's nothing connecting them except for romance and sexual attraction. And so if you look at television for children, even in pre-adolescents, and not to mention adolescents, it's all, when it's about boys and girls, first of all, they're segregated. You know, there's boy groups and girl groups. And when there is interaction, it's always about romance and sexual attraction, even at a young age. And the idea was, why can't we show girls and boys actually having similarities, sharing things together? They're not that different. They all want to be loved. They all want to be doing well. They all want to have, you know, safety and security and have dreams about the future. There's lots of similarity between them. The image here is actually from, I do want to say something. It's an Israeli program. The boy is Jewish Israeli, the girl's Palestinian. The boy initiated a peace movement in Israel. And his father, who happened to be the documentary filmmaker, documented the process. He decided that, okay, the politicians are not successful, children will bring peace. And he initiated a peace movement, and he went and reached out to Palestinian children. And they started this peace movement that collapsed it was kind of unfortunate. As you know, there was no peace in the Middle East, so they were not that successful. But they got into internal fights. But here is an example of a boy and a girl, Palestinian girl, Jewish boy. Both of them have similar dreams and aspirations for a peaceful world in the Middle East. And they're working together. There's nothing about sex here, nothing about romance, nothing about, you know, they could have made it into a Palestinian Jewish, you know, love across the national border. No, it wasn't about that. It was about working for peace. Fifth was unity. So how not only that boys and girls are similar, but they can unite together, and that the other movie also talks about that, unite together towards a particular goal, that they can collaborate, they can work together. And same with different races, etc. I'm moving fast because I want to be able to share one other thing. The issue of family that I mentioned before. The need to have a collective, a family, a context, a social context where children will grow up to understand that they have a responsibility beyond themselves and that others have a responsibility for them, and etc. And authenticity was a major issue. I mean, one of the problems, for example, when you look at children's programs, and particularly when you look at adolescents' programs, that many times, because most of the programs produced in the United States and because of labor laws, employing children is a complicated issue. There are legal requirements to give them rest time. They can't work more than that many hours. There are all kinds of issues about how you protect children, and rightly so. In order to go around it, what companies do is they employ much older actors to play younger roles. So you'll have a 20-year-old woman, you know, playing the role of a 12-year-old adolescent. Now, whether she tries or not to look 12 and behave 12, she is a mature woman of 20, and she carries herself as a, you know, mature woman of 20, and it comes across. So you get all those actors and actresses that are playing way above their age. So it's not authentic. That's the point I'm trying to say. And the issue here was, you have to present to children in an authentic way, the way children really are in different cultures, different ages, etc. Finally, the last one was giving children a voice, extremely important element of children actually talking for themselves. And it's not necessarily that child is talking, but whatever when you're preparing a program or content for children, their own voice, their own perspective needs to be there, not just whatever we enforce of them from our perspective in the world. So that was, I'm skipping this and getting to this. I want to finish, because I've got just a few more minutes, with a project that is very, very dear to my heart, and I think ties nicely to the first presentation this morning, so it will be nice to close with this. I had the real fortune and privilege of collaborating with a colleague of mine. Her name is Barbara Kaluki. She is not a scholar or researcher. She is a field worker working for UNICEF for many, many years. Particularly with children, marginalized children, children of, you know, in disaster areas after a tsunami, after a war, earthquake, refugee children. working with them to use media in ways that will better their lives. And again, the focus here is the positive potential of media rather than the negative potential. And so she does workshops around the world. She goes after a tsunami in Indonesia, she went there and they helped them teach children, how to handle hygiene issues of standing water, for example, etc. So we participated in that because we were talking at the time, and she shared with me that there are so many wonderful examples of communication for children around the world that we don't know about and could be really helpful to deal with all kinds of marginalized and not privileged children around the world within our cultures as well. I mean, as we know, we heard, there are plenty of children that need help and support within each of our cultures around the world. So what we started to do is collect examples from around the world of positive communications with children, and I'm calling it communication, not media, because we had everything from traditional finger games, puppet shows, oral stories, all the way, through animation, television, etc., all the way to modern apps on mobile phones of teaching children, that they need to go and get their polio shot or whatever. So, or contraceptives to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS. So we had the whole range from most traditional all the way to advanced media. And we collected them from around the world. And again, similar to what I did it only later dawned on me that it was similar to what I did in the other book, that I actually collected the data, but we tried to theorize and conceptualize. And we came out of it with principles of what is good communication with children. And we made it was sponsored by UNICEF. It came out as a book, but most importantly, it came out as a website that is free. You can see the website. You're welcome to go in there. And it has, it's written in a very accessible way. The idea was that anybody, any education person, a parent, policymaker, anybody who doesn't understand much in media, whatever, and doesn't understand much in child psychology can access it. Many, like 70 of the producers of those media gave us copyright permission to post it free on web, so people can go in and see examples of, here's a good poster for hygiene teaching, and here's a great book about HIV/AIDS, and here's a wonderful animation about something. And we organized it and created principles, and I'll just very briefly just say, it was also kind of it was part of the critical response to the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child that calls for communication rights, but I just want to say something about the overarching goal. Communication what is good communication for children, and I'm closing with this. Communication that values and actively reaches out to children of all ages and their caregivers. It was really important that it's not only the child, but it's also trying to educate the parents, the caregivers, using an integrated approach which is developmentally appropriate. I mean, the consideration that different children at different ages have different needs and different abilities. That it's culturally sensitive, because what is culturally appropriate in one place is totally not culturally appropriate in the other place. And I'll give you an example. I mean, of course, it can work in different ways, but in South Africa, there's so much effort to educate children and adolescents and adults about HIV/AIDS, because the spread it's really a major national threat, that there's lots of open discussion about contraceptives with young children that here in the United States nobody would have allowed on public media. You would have never seen, advertising of condoms on Saturday morning cartoons for children. That would never happen. But you see it there, and so there's a lot more freedom of discussion of contraceptives and sex and safe sex in South Africa than in most of the other developed world, modern countries that see themselves as more advanced. So it's kind of counterintuitive. But many examples about cultural sensitive and inclusive. And by inclusive, I mean children of all races and ages and disabilities. One of the issues was disability. I'll just show you this one slide. This slide. Those are all kinds of materials of children with disabilities. One of the major issues that UNICEF is dealing with in developing countries is children with disabilities. The rate of disabilities is very high in underdeveloped countries or in the global south due to lack of hygiene, due to lack of proper nutrition and immunization, due to mines. Lots of children that lose their limbs because of stepping on mines left from old wars. So there's a lot of disabilities, and disproportionately to what we used in more westernized countries. So the idea of include, and of course, many children that carry the HIV/AIDS virus. So the inclusion of children of all races, all gender, all ages, all religions, but a great emphasis on children with all forms of disability, mental, physical, etc., as part of this positive communication. With that, of course, I can go on and on. I hope I gave you enough kind of catalyst to think about the positive role that media can have in the lives of children. Thank you so much. Oh, that's right.
Thank you, Dafna.
Yeah.
So we will now have some questions, please, before we break for lunch.
In your statistical analysis, you had some data concerning the participation or the inequality of gender-based and race-based. I think part of the problem, do you think, and how do you address it in terms of encouraging institutions so that they create opportunities for the children, the girls, to become more programmers, go into technology, because I think the bias comes from the fact that there are more people involved in the technology that are males, or also racial bias too.
Yeah.
So when you have the data, then how do you approach the institutions to make the changes so there are opportunities?
Thank you for that wonderful question. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's a lot of research in media about who produces the content and who they are. Of course, the more you have diversity in the production side and technology side of, of race, of gender, of age, whatever, the more you will have a more advanced and diverse screen. So you're absolutely right. What we did, as I said, because the data came from producers. You're talking about the original study, but because I'm interacting with this festival that has producers from around the world, we do, every 2 years when we meet, we do many workshops to producers. We disseminated all those findings in dozens and dozens of workshops with producers around the world, not only myself, but my colleague in Germany. And so it went not only to scholars, when we use data to studies to show in conferences like this, but to many producers, organizations, conscious raising groups, et cetera, to call their attention to that. I have to admit that we're not being very successful because this was in 2007, but we've more studies, smaller, on smaller level have been done since then. We don't see dramatic changes. I don't know if you're familiar, in Los Angeles, the actress Gina Davis has this Institute for Gender Equality in Hollywood, and she initiated that years ago, maybe 10 years ago, et cetera, and they just released the study, and they're monitoring Hollywood movies. They just released the study on gender portrayals in Hollywood in the last year of movies, and it still looks terrible. It's still dominated by men, directors, men animators, men producers, men. So progress is slow, but you're right that in order to make change, you have to have change with the people who go in the industry. I hope that my role as an educator, because I'm in a university, and my particular college trains people to become media producers and news broadcasters in the different media professions. I hope that we train them with a little bit more social conscience, so when they go out, they will do things differently. But clearly, the progress is not as fast as we would have liked it to be. And you're absolutely right with your question. Thank you.
We'll take one more question.
I infer from your talk that you're talking about media bias that's either unintentional or ambivalent about the issues, but I wonder if you ever looked at those that were quite intentional, where authorities are purposefully trying to create the prejudices that we've seen in certain parts of the world.
Yep. Well, that's an excellent question. I have not particularly looked at political messages or because I was looking at children's media that is kind of commercial media that travels around the world, that most of it at least you would think is not purposeful, although you can of course go deeper and say it is purposeful because all commercial media is promoting products. It's promoting American economy and values. So it depends. When I'm thinking of intentional, I'm thinking of a continuum. There's the continuum. Even what seems unintentional is intentional in some ways because it's promoting particular capitalist notions of consumerism, et cetera, But I have not examined real intentional, propaganda, et cetera. I actually have a colleague in my university who's studying ultra-right media in Europe, but not for children, for adults. That's a fascinating topic to study, but no, I did not. Thank you.